The US Supreme Court has now issued a unanimous 9-0 gun ruling, and the part that should get your attention is not what most headlines are focusing on. This was not a narrow split decision. Every single justice agreed. And that means the court just sent a very clear message about where the next big gunfights in America will happen, who can be sued, and what kind of legal strategy will likely fail from now on. In the next few minutes, I'm going to break down what the court actually decided, why the ruling was unanimous, what it means for gun owners and non-gun owners, and the one sentence in this opinion that legal observers should be watching very closely. Let's get into it, starting with the part most people completely misunderstand. Here's what changed, and why it matters immediately. The case was called Smith & Wesson Brands versus Estados Unidos Mexicanos. Mexico sued major U.S. gun manufacturers, claiming their business practices helped fuel illegal trafficking to cartels and violence inside Mexico. But the Supreme Court threw that lawsuit out in a 9-0 decision. Justice Elena Kagan wrote the opinion for a unanimous court, and the ruling said Mexico had not plausibly shown that the gun companies aided and abetted illegal sales in a way that could get around federal legal protections for the industry. Now, this is where people get confused. Some viewers hear gun ruling and assume the court just expanded the Second Amendment. That is not what happened here. The justices did not announce a new right to carry a firearm. They did not strike down a state permit law, and they did not say all gun-related lawsuits are over. What they did say is that this particular lawsuit could not move forward because federal law gives gun makers broad protection when criminals misuse their products, unless a plaintiff can fit into a narrow exception. That distinction matters a lot. Write that down. The federal law at the center of this case is called the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, often shortened to PLCAA. Congress passed it in 2005 to stop a wave of lawsuits trying to make gun manufacturers pay for crimes committed by third parties. Mexico tried to get around that shield by arguing that the companies knowingly allowed a system that helped traffickers and straw purchasers move guns south. But the Supreme Court said that was not enough. According to the opinion, simply knowing that some bad actors misuse a product is not the same as intentionally helping them commit crimes. So, what does this mean for you? It means the court just made it harder to use broad civil lawsuits to pressure the gun industry over criminal misuse by third parties. If you are a gun owner, this ruling signals stronger protection for manufacturers against this kind of liability theory. If you are not a gun owner, it means major policy changes are less likely to come through courtroom workarounds and more likely to come through elected lawmakers, agencies, and state legislatures. And that connects directly back to the hidden sentence I mentioned earlier, because that sentence tells you where this battle is moving next. Most people don't realize this, but the court used very plain language in this opinion. One line says, "When a company merely knows that some bad actors are taking advantage of its products for criminal purposes, it does not aid and abet." Another says, "A manufacturer of goods is not an accomplice to every unaffiliated retailer whom it fails to make follow the law." That is the court drawing a bright line. The justices were saying that suspicion, general awareness, or failure to stop every bad sale is not the same as active participation in a specific crime. That is a major legal boundary. Now let's move to the second point, because this is where the story gets more important. Why is a 9-0 ruling unusual here? Because gun cases in America are usually polarizing. They often split the court. They often divide the country. And they usually trigger instant political outrage. But in this case, every justice agreed on the result. Justice Kagan wrote the main opinion. Justice Thomas wrote separately. Justice Jackson wrote separately. Yet all 9 agreed that Mexico's theory did not meet the legal standard needed to continue the lawsuit. That kind of alignment is rare in modern gun-related litigation. Stop. This is the part most people are missing. The reason both sides of the court could agree is that this case was less about personal gun ownership and more about legal causation, statutory protection, and how far civil liability can stretch. In other words, the justices were not all suddenly agreeing on America's gun culture. They were agreeing on a narrower question. Can you hold gun companies responsible in court for violence committed by criminals when the complaint does not identify specific transactions the companies intentionally helped make happen? The court's answer was no. That is why the ruling was unanimous. And now, here is the exact part I want you to pay attention to. The court said this law reflects Congress's view that the democratic process, not litigation, should set the terms of gun control. That is the hidden sentence I told you about earlier. Read that again mentally. Not litigation, the democratic process. That means the justices are signaling that if Americans want tougher rules, looser rules, stronger protections, or new limits, those fights should be carried to Congress, state capitals, and elections, not built through creative lawsuits that try to force industry-wide change from the bench. This next part could affect you directly. So what does this mean for you? It means your rights, your restrictions, and your local gun rules may be shaped less by sweeping lawsuits and more by lawmakers you vote for or do not vote for. That matters whether you own a firearm or not, because if the battlefield shifts back to legislatures, then the real pressure moves to state houses, attorneys general, governors, Congress, and federal agencies. And if you are retired, living on a fixed income, worried about crime, or simply trying to understand how the law affects your family, that means paying attention to elections and state policy becomes even more important. Now here's where it gets serious. Let's talk about real-life impact. If you own firearms legally, this ruling may feel like a layer of stability for the market. It reduces the chance that a massive lawsuit like this one could be used to financially pressure major manufacturers based on downstream criminal misuse. That can matter for pricing, supply, business confidence, and how the industry plans for the future. It also tells manufacturers that broad allegations about bad actors in the chain are not enough by themselves. Courts will want specific evidence of deliberate assistance to illegal transactions. If you do not own guns, this still matters to you. Why? Because many people who support tighter gun laws hoped lawsuits like this could force major changes even when Congress was deadlocked. This ruling makes that path harder. So if someone is expecting nationwide gun policy to shift because courts will punish manufacturers into changing how they operate, this decision is a warning sign. That strategy now faces a steeper climb. Most people don't realize this, but sometimes what the court refuses to allow is just as important as what it openly creates. And there is another layer here. The court did not say gun companies can never be sued. That part matters. AP noted that the ruling does not appear to foreclose every case brought under narrower theories, including cases that claim a company violated a specific law. That is important because victims' families in the Sandy Hook case reached a major settlement after arguing that marketing practices violated state law. So this ruling is big, but it is not a blank check. It protects against broad theories like the one Mexico advanced here, yet narrower claims may still survive if they fit a specific legal exception. So, what does this mean for you? It means you should avoid the two biggest mistakes people make after a ruling like this. Mistake number 1. Thinking the court just rewrote the Second Amendment. It did not. Mistake number 2. Thinking the gun industry now has total immunity in every case. It does not. The real takeaway sits in the middle. Broad blame for criminal misuse got rejected here, but targeted lawsuits tied to actual statutory violations may still be possible. That middle ground is where a lot of future legal fights will happen. And this connects back to that line I mentioned earlier. Let's move to the fourth point. What could happen next? First, expect gun control advocates and some state officials to focus even more on legislation, licensing rules, dealer oversight, record-keeping requirements, marketing restrictions, and state-level industry regulations. If the Supreme Court says broad litigation is not the main path, then political energy usually goes somewhere else. Second, expect more attention on dealer-level enforcement, because the court's opinion drew a sharp distinction between a company making a lawful product and a specific seller committing an unlawful transaction. That difference may shape future lawsuits and policy proposals. Third, watch the lower courts. Mexico pointed to a separate lawsuit it filed in Arizona against 5 gun shops and distributors, and AP reported that Mexican officials said they would keep fighting arms trafficking through other legal and diplomatic options. That tells you this debate is not ending, it is changing shape. Instead of one massive theory aimed at top manufacturers, the focus may shift to more targeted defendants, more tailored claims, and more state-specific laws. This is where that hidden detail becomes important, because the court has basically said, if change is coming, it must be built through narrower legal claims or through politics. Fourth, do not ignore what this means for future Supreme Court cases. When the court speaks unanimously in a politically sensitive area, lower courts notice, lawyers notice, state officials notice, businesses notice. The message here is that the justices want clear proof before letting expansive liability theories proceed against the firearms industry. That could influence how future complaints are written, how aggressively cases are filed, and how judges screen them early. Write this down. A unanimous ruling often travels farther than a close one because it looks less ideological and more like a rule every judge is expected to respect. So what does this mean for you? It means the legal system just gave you a preview of the next chapter. If you care about gun rights, pay attention to legislatures. If you care about gun safety, pay attention to legislatures. If you care about border violence, cartel trafficking, and whether U.S. businesses can be held responsible for overseas harm, pay attention to legislatures. The court did not solve the national argument, it redirected it, and that may be the most important part of this entire ruling. Not what the justices closed, but where they told the country to go next. Before I wrap up, let me make one final point very clearly. This decision will be described in very dramatic ways by both sides. Some will say the court just protected American freedom. Others will say the court just protected the gun industry. In truth, the legal holding is more specific. The justices said Mexico's complaint did not plausibly allege that these companies intentionally helped illegal gun sales in a way that overcame federal statutory protection. That is the legal core. But the political impact is broader because the court's own language tells Americans where the next fight belongs. And that brings us right back to the sentence most people will miss the first time. The democratic process, not litigation, should set the terms of gun control. That line is bigger than this one case. It tells lawmakers they cannot sit back and expect courts to do their work for them. It tells activists that strategy matters. It tells voters that their local and national elections matter more than ever. And it tells everyday Americans, especially older Americans trying to protect their families and understand a fast-changing country, that this issue is far from over. It is just entering a new phase. Before you go, I have one question. Do you think this Supreme Court decision protects your rights or limits them? Comment protect or limit. I read every response. Because the next video I'm releasing covers another major ruling that could impact millions. And if you're not subscribed, you'll miss it. Also, go back to around the 2:30 mark. There's one detail I explained that most people missed the first time.